Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. You really think I'm gonna say it again? Beetlejuice is a cult classic from 1988 directed by the gore-loving Tim Burton. It's 36 years later and we now have an acid trip of a sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. But what else were you expecting? Let's talk about it. Earlier this week, my boyfriend and I watched the original Beetlejuice from 1988, and then this weekend we watched the sequel Beetlejuice Beetlejuice when it came out in theaters. It was my first time ever seeing Beetlejuice, and I will say it was definitely an interesting ride. The visual effects of the original movie are a little bit out of date, but I also think that's kind of what gives it some of its charm. The 2024 sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, brings back a lot of the original cast, with the exceptions of the characters who played the Maitlands and the character who played Mr. Deeds. More on him later. In addition, the new movie also features Jenna Ortega, Willem Dafoe, and a quick cameo by Danny DeVito.
Hello!
This movie definitely does not disappoint on bringing back some of the nostalgia of the first movie. We of course have the ridiculous shenanigans of Beetlejuice himself. Beetlejuice is of course still trying to win back his bride Lydia Dietz, and we even have the red wedding dress make a comeback. We also have the wonderful Catherine O'Hara making her comeback as Delia Dietz. She is now a self-made artist living and working out of New York City, and she is still as dramatic as ever. Honestly, I kind of feel like the character of Delia was a little bit more fleshed out in this movie than the first. She had some really good moments. Catherine O'Hara is amazing at what she does, and I just felt like we got to see her be more of herself. Whereas in the first movie, I felt like Delia was a lot more just out to get her way. In the second movie, she seems more dramatic, but in a fun and engaging way that really brings the movie to life. We of course have the recognizable afterlife waiting room, along with the characters such as Bob. Bob was probably one of my favorites, honestly stole the show, and really wish they wouldn't have killed him off. That was really the most emotional spot for me in this movie. And of course, it wouldn't be Tim Burton's Beetlejuice if it wasn't for the most dramatic deaths you could ever imagine. It's as if all of the people from Dumb Ways to Die are featured in the afterlife of Beetlejuice. I kind of feel bad. Are there no people who just died normal, peaceful deaths? While Beetlejuice Beetlejuice brings back a lot of the nostalgia of the first film, it also builds upon the lore and world of the afterlife. We see a little bit more of what everyday life is like in the quote-unquote afterlife. For example, I thought it was very interesting that people need dry cleaning done. We also see that there are detectives and a police force, which is where Willem Dafoe comes in. Say hi, Penny. Say Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Expanding on the lore more, we also learn about the Soul Train, which brings people to the beyond. We also learn that ghosts can switch lives with people who are still alive, and that is where a lot of the conflict in this movie comes from. One thing that I will say about this movie is it is flat out ridiculous. We have a proposal at a funeral and supposed defanged snakes that end up killing Delia herself. I kind of saw that one coming, but it was funny nonetheless. We have a blood-gushing Mr. Deeds with the top part of his body bitten off by a shark. The way he talked really grossed me out with the blood in his voice, but again, gotta hand it to Mr. Burton. It's kind of ingenious, especially when they had to work around not having the original character playing that role. Again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We've got a crazy musical number during a wedding ceremony, a soul-sucking ex-lover, a therapist version of Mr. Beetlejuice, which I think was so funny. There's baby Beetlejuice, which is honestly more terrifying than the grown version. I thought the very self-aware beep out of the F word in the wedding ceremony was comical. It was just so unexpected and stupid and silly. I thought it was brilliant.
What the f?
And at the end, we also have Lydia's dream sequence, which is kind of an acid trip all in and of itself. It's ridiculous, it's dark, it's grand, it's gross. But it's Tim Burton, and you can't expect less than that. So we've kind of covered the gist of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about some of the issues I had with the movie. There are a lot of plot points, and some of them are just kind of unnecessary. I left the movie being like, why was there so much going on? Some of that could have just been taken out and we still would have had a good movie. For example, the whole Dolores subplots felt a little bit underdeveloped, and it also felt a little bit rushed whenever she was on screen. It took the entire movie to build up to the climax of that storyline, and in the end it just felt a little bit unsatisfying because she disappears and it really doesn't add much to the movie. I enjoyed seeing the background of Beetlejuice back when he was still alive and when he married Dolores. That was an interesting take, and I think we could have done that without having to introduce another villain to the entire story. We also have Rory, the gold digger fiance of Lydia Dietz. He had some funny moments, but in the same way as Dolores, I don't feel like he was needed. He was just kind of there, and I don't feel like he was really an integral part to the plot itself. We also have the Willem Dafoe character, which I know like that is a great name to have it in your movie, and he did a great job, but it also didn't add a whole lot to the story. None of these characters necessarily ruined the movie. They were fun to watch. They were good actors who played those roles, but in the end, they just felt like extra things that were added to the movie for the purpose of adding them. They were kind of just there, and I'm not sure that they were super needed. I think if these subplots had been removed, we could have dove in more into the characters and some of their character development and relationships, specifically with their loved ones in the afterlife. For example, we spent a lot of time hearing about Astrid's dad and how much she misses him and wants to see him. And then once he actually appears, he only gets about 10 minutes of screen time, and Astrid and Lydia kind of just run off, say goodbye, and that's it. I was left thinking like, I feel like they should have spent more time really catching up since they've been apart so long. I feel like they should have had a more proper goodbye that was a little bit more heartfelt. Coming back to Mr. Dietz, as I said we would earlier, the actor who originally played Mr. Dietz in the original movie was Jeffrey Jones. He was charged with possessions of a child. I assume this is the reason he did not reprise his role and why they did not cast him in the sequel. But with that said, they had a very clever way of avoiding his likeness in the movie. They obviously killed him off to avoid having to have him be in the entirety of the movie. And then they had him, like I said earlier, be half eaten by a shark so that his face wouldn't have to be in the movie. And then they also did the animation of his actual death. So obviously they used his likeness, but it wasn't actually the actor himself reprising the role. Thought that was very clever. It's obvious, but it's also clever. So I guess I don't really have an issue with it, but just thought I'd point it out because I know for myself, I just assumed he had died, but there's actually a little bit more to why he's not in the movie than that. While this movie isn't the emotionally hard-hitting story that I would usually prefer in a movie, I did find it to have a good underlying message to it. It really shows us not to take times with our loved ones for granted because we never know when a non-defanged snake will bite them and they will die. That's a little bit insensitive, perhaps, but you know what I mean. I liked that we got to see Astrid interacting with her dad and getting to say goodbye. As I said earlier, would have loved to see some more of that and see it fleshed out a little bit more. But again, Tim Burton's not extremely known for super emotionally moving stories, I don't think, so like it would be kind of out of character for that to have been part of this movie. In addition, I liked seeing Delia tell Lydia and Astrid goodbye and that she was like, enjoy your life, live it to the fullest, don't hate each other. I thought that was a really beautiful way to end the movie because honestly at first I thought when she had come back to the wedding that for some reason she was alive again. And I was like, well, how are they going to play that off? But turns out she was still dead and she did still have to go back to the afterlife. And it was sweet getting to see her reunite with Mr. Dietz. I liked that as the ending. And then it was also nice getting to see her have a proper goodbye with her family. Overall, I don't think this is a terrible movie. I left being like a little bit confused and unsure of how I felt about it. I think because of the extravagant nature of the franchise, it makes it easier for me to let go of some of the issues I had with it because it is Tim Burton and I can't expect him to make a movie that I would prefer because it's his style and it's his extravagant world that he built and is having fun with. Now the only question is, will there be a third installment of this film? While Beetlejuice Beetlejuice doesn't leave a lot of loose ends at the end of the film, it does lead to the possibility or the hint that there could be a third film with Beetlejuice appearing in Lydia's dream. Tim Burton himself has more or less said no, this is not going to happen, and if it does happen, it's probably going to happen with a different director. With how well this film is doing in the box office, I imagine Warner Brothers is going to want to make a third film. If they're going to do that, they're not going to be able to wait 30 years because Michael Keaton is in like his 70s, so they're going to have to get that done sooner rather than later if they're going to make a third movie. And honestly, they've started a pattern. They have to end with getting audiences to say Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
Oh no.